Hey there, friends. My name is Sarah Mastriani Levy. I'm so glad that you've decided to spend some time with us. We're going to have another healing conversation tonight. And as we met with our guest briefly beforehand, I said, "Is there anything off limits?" And he said, "No, we're talking about vulnerability." And that, I think, is the essence of vulnerability is knowing that your truth will be safe in the space that it's shared. And that's one of the things that we try and do, William and I, in these healing conversations, is to create a safe space for both ourselves and our guests so that whatever shows up will allow us to heal and to be real. I think that's really critical to both of us, being the realist that we can be. And so now we have an opportunity to talk with Kevin Shah. We're going to dive into the idea of vulnerability a little bit deeper, and how telling your story can be a mode of healing. So let's have a healing conversation. Please join me, William and Kevin. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for taking time to be with us. And we're interested in looking into this idea of storytelling as a way of digging deeper into vulnerability. I heard a bit of your amazing Disconnect to Connect conversation from December with William on empathy. So I know that you know how to talk with people and to hear them and to build bridges to help them understand differently. But I would love for you to take a minute to introduce yourself and dig into this idea of vulnerability and storytelling and how it can be helpful to our listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, William, for having me. My name is Kevin Shah. My pronouns are he, him. I am the CEO and co-founder of a startup called Jago, which means to wake up in Hindi. And it's our mission is to create a world where people seek to understand one another by making empathy a daily habit. And I found that in my journey on this startup and creating a solution, a mobile app-based solution where people can upload their story and share any story they want, and that is we empower their stories to help other people understand each other and build empathy. And the best way to sort of describe why this vulnerability and is healing and why this is something that I think is so important is one of the stories we have in our library is someone was recording the story, and they have bipolar disorder, and they're recording their story, and they're just sharing different stories, and this is their third story they were recording, and they were uploading. And while they were recording, in the story they say, as I was recording the story, I realized that I needed help by just telling my story about my bipolar disorder that I hadn't done before, and just doing it in this app and putting it out there. I realized that as I was talking through these things, I needed to go get some help and with my bipolar disorder. And we have that story in our library. And that example and that story sort of illustrates why healing with conversation or the vulnerability is such an important part of not only healing ourselves, but healing others as well. And that is such an important part of the thread that goes through the work I'm doing. When I talk about empathy, I said, what empathy is fueled by vulnerability.
For sure. Brene Brown definitely talks a lot about empathy and shame and how we build things through storytelling. I'm interested, you talked about your platform that I'm not familiar with other than by name. Tell me a little bit about, what was the impetus to start this platform, and how do people, do they stumble upon it, or is there how are they getting to this platform altogether?
Yeah. It's an interesting story in that I've been working in tech my entire career. I build IoT products, so these are Internet of Things products. And I was working in tech for law enforcement, so building product technology solutions for police, for like body cameras and taser and software services. I was one of the product leaders. And when George Floyd's murder happened in 2020, I saw that the work I was doing, the company stock that I was working for hit an all-time high the next trading day after the murder. And I get it. The Wall Street and the market is saying that, oh, police are gonna buy their products more, and the company's value is going up. But the impact was someone's murder made me wealthier. and made a small group of unrelated people wealthier. And I saw the police during the protests that followed using some of the products I had built against the protesters. And that made me feel disgusted. That made me feel just really, really feel like I was on the wrong side. And so I resigned. I gave up. I had a compensation package over 8 years of worth $15 million that I gave up, and I resigned. And in that moment, I asked the question, how do we the polarization that was happening, because it's still happening because of the in the country and the world right now, and the how do we get people to understand each other? And I was watching the documentary Crip Camp on Netflix, which is this incredible documentary that the Obamas have produced, and it's about the civil rights movements of people with disability in the United States. And after that, I was like, why can't more people watch that kind of a documentary and just learn? And then I realized there's a scale problem. The problem is time. People have to opt in. It's hard to connect. And then you can't just watch it once and one thing. You have to keep at it. You have to create a habit around this. You have to keep yourself aware. And so that led to the idea of me being a technologist. Like, how do we solve this at scale? And that led to me building a mobile app where people can download the app and they watch real stories. So we say 6 minutes a day, like an empathy gym. You watch 2 stories a day, and then you take a perspective taking exercise right after, where you force yourself in the storyteller's perspective, and then you get a measurable score. And the way we approach this is we want to offer it to companies. So companies make it as part of their diversity, equity, inclusion programs and initiatives, and make it available and to their employees as a benefit. So all the employees download the app as part of the company. And then the company builds stories and shares stories within their company itself to build a stronger culture and start seeing the humans behind the titles and build a culture where vulnerability is seen as courageous and a strength.
That's brilliant. That's really brilliant. I love that. And, I'm thinking, I'm just kind of like playing through this idea of these exercises and curious what they look like. But then I immediately, as you were describing it, thought, okay, maybe we've got different coworkers and different subsectors of a company. But are the upper level people being as vulnerable as the people who are being paid less?
Yeah, that's exactly one of the way we initiate the program is, as a company, we said we want the leaders to first share their stories before anyone else on the team. The C-suite, the first stories in the company should be shared by the leaders. So when we roll it out, the first thing we ask is, okay, leaders, can you just record a story in 3 minutes or less? Tell a story, so that shows that you are creating a safe space by leading. That I'm going to tell my story, and it's going to be a personal story, and it's going to be sharing something that you didn't know about me, and now I'm going to do that. So that's definitely the first step we encourage leaders to take. And then the second step is how we prioritize those stories, because we have public stories, and then these are the company level stories. So we prioritize those stories in the journey, in the learning journey, and then we encourage the other employees in the companies to share, so they feel seen and heard. So you can start hearing stories and perspectives of different people, which most of the time we just say, oh, that person's in IT, and that person's in marketing, and that person's here. But what if we knew, oh, that's Sarah, and that's William, and William's story is this.
Right. The one thing, and I really got it the first time, I heard, you were able to share this. But the question that still, there's always a but, right? The question that still comes up for me when I'm looking at healing through vulnerability and story, right? For me, culturally, and as the stories that I would get as a man, right? One, vulnerability, that ain't a thing that you do, right? Right. And it's like, I realize that the importance of my healing, that it's going to take a level of telling my story at a level that there's vulnerability in there. And so how can you convince people that there's healing on the other side of that? But I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely one of the harder questions to answer, because unless you tell your story. So
Right.
let's say if I give you a prompt, like William or Sarah, like let's say, what is the first time, William, you realized you were Black?
Hmm. I know I was in elementary school, and I I said something, right? Or I said something to, a little girl, and she was and she said, "Is that how Black people talk or something?" And I was like, "What?" Right? Right? It's like, um, y- you know, um, yeah, no, and I just remember thinking that even though there was a lot of different cultures in the class or anything like that, and I knew that people looked differently and everything, but that was for me the first time that there was not just I look different, I sound different, I am different. It wasn't just like kids in a classroom for me anymore. And then I remember just asking questions around that. And it was just really, and then it went down from there or something. I don't know. But it was that there's this loss of innocence, because I remember Little Rascals, and I was fascinated that all these diverse kids just playing, diverse poor kids playing, right? Um, and realizing that there is a point in our life development where it's going to be harder for just diverse kids to just be playing. Because I saw it in my neighborhood. I saw it. And I just didn't understand why. It's like you were just a kid, and then you weren't just a kid. You were a teenage Black kid. Then that's a totally different beast than um, a 7-year old or something like that. So that was something for me that I can remember. I'm trying to remember her name because I saw her face as soon as you asked me about that. I was like, wow, yeah. All right. It's like, is that how Black people talk? And just go from there.
So thank you for sharing that story and for being vulnerable with me there. And as you share the story, how did it make you feel?
I felt like another. I felt like that. I don't want to say that there was something wrong, but there was. I remember feeling that I don't think she understands me. I don't think, I don't, there's why are we having this you know what I mean? It wasn't just kids saying stuff. It was like, I have to like be mindful of what I'm saying, because I don't think she's going to understand what I'm saying. And I think that's why I then stopped talking. I mean, I was a quiet kid. I just did.
Oh.
I stopped asking questions. I wasn't, and wow, this is just coming up for me. I mean, I was just a quiet, shy kid at school because I didn't want to be misunderstood.
And now sharing this amazingly courageous story with us, how do you feel now, thinking about it, reflecting back?
I, you know, I really, um, I really didn't think that was much of an anchor, right? And it was like, wow, I just, I feel that I do have something to say. There is a lost in translation. There is a different experience, and it's not good or bad. It is just that's what it is. But I made it mean something more than that, that caused me show up and not show up in my communication.
Wow. Thank you for going on this journey with me, William, because you're back to your question, how does it feel healing? Like you said, you just mentioned, like, I didn't realize
Yeah.
that was an anchor. and having these prompts and then thinking about those feelings of how you felt. At least I felt a little bit healed on my side because I didn't know that story. And does it show a little bit like how you starting to now get to know yourself a little bit better?
Yeah. Look, the one word conversations is about, recognizing that people, have different stories, different understanding of words, right? So I want to really in a place, in a safe space or whatever, just kind of like, hey, share what your understanding of it. So now we can have a conversation. And I didn't realize it was connected to that experience. And so it's, I just thought that, I was just a curious kid and want to know what people think, right?
Yeah.
But it's my desire. I know I have a desire to connect with people on a meaningful level. I've always had that. And that was what my curiosity was. So I understand, so I can connect. And I felt like I didn't have that, and I haven't had that. And so I'm creating things now to get back to that. So, wow, thank you.
Thank you. And this is how I convince people how stories and vulnerability is healing.
I've just loved the unfolding of all this right now, because I think knowing you, William, for quite a few years now, and hearing you talk about being misunderstood and how you've made such valiant efforts as an adult to clarify and not be misunderstood, and how much of that is a cycling and triggering from that very same moment that you just shared with us as the anchor. But also, I keep going back and forth. I went, when you asked that question, I went into my head and thought of when was the first time that I realized I was white. So I flipped the script. But then I also went into the place of, okay, so he talked about like upper level management and lower, do they call it lower level management or lower level workers? I don't even, I feel like it's employees. I don't want to like put all these hierarchies in it.
I was going to say peons. That's not.
Let's break down the hierarchical structures. I'm all for that.
But I, okay, so I'm playing this out in my mind that let's say that a leader decides that they're going to share a story and they're going to, surface level vulnerability is very different than deep level shame inducing vulnerability. So the CEOs show up and, hey, here's my story about my tricycle when I was little, just some story, right? And then the workers, there's an incentive for the workers to listen. Generally incentive means payment or reward of some sort. CEOs and so forth are not looking for benefits or extra payment. So what is their incentive to better understand and listen to the stories of their workers?
So one of the incentives for the leaders is, number one, to understand who their team members are. Who are the people that are going to bring in new perspectives that they are lacking? The incentives are to connect with some of these folks, to build a culture of loyalty. One of the biggest costs that companies have is recruitment, people leaving, retention. So for leaders to listen to the stories, and then if, let's say today, let's say I'm the CEO, William is on my team. I just heard that story from William. Then I go and I send a message to William, like, thank you for sharing that story. It meant a lot. And your communication is amazing now. Now I've connected. So now William will have a sense of loyalty stronger with me than with another leader who hasn't done that, who hasn't heard William's story.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, I get that. So how do people, I kind of asked this before, but do they stumble upon your company, or like how do they find it to get excited about it the way I'm feeling excited now listening to you talk about it?
Yeah, that's the part that we're working right now. The way we're doing it is we're reaching out to companies. We're reaching out to heads of diversity, equity, inclusion, or HR folks at companies to get them to sort of try this out and test it out in trial. One of the ways we're also doing it is we've got a safe zone workshop on. Every month we are hosting a free safe zone workshop, which we facilitate, where over 2 hours we, using the LGBTQ lens, I'm a gay man, we teach companies for free how to create safe spaces. And part of that workshop, we talk about Jago as well, and we share stories and we create those vulnerable safe spaces. So absolutely, finding out about this is something that we are working on. We've got the app ready, the platform ready. We've got a story of hundreds of stories now, a library of hundreds of stories. And now our goal is to start to get companies who want to trial. And because of this, if there's a company that's listening and wants a free trial for we'll do a 2-month trial because of this show, and we'll get them going.
Wow, that's so generous. That's beautiful. Gosh, I'm thinking about these exercises that you said that happen afterwards, after I've listened to a story, to be able to step into the shoes of someone else. Can you kind of go into, is it just a question that they have to answer, or what is it? What is that exercise?
We did a little bit with William. In fact, I used some of those questions, and I purposely did it so I can reference it, and it brings that that healing part of it. So when a storyteller uploads a story, they get to see different prompts. They have ideas. So we give a bunch of themes. The themes are based on intersectionality or personal ideas like personal finance or family or spirituality, or could be about professional aspects, leadership, sales, negotiation. It could be any of these things. And if a theme doesn't exist, they can add it. And then we give different prompts. One of the prompts was the first time you realized you were blank, or a time when change was hard, or sometime when you were really, really blank. And then you fill in the blank, and those trigger those amazing, powerful stories that are healing, that drive vulnerability. After you record your story, and when you upload it, we ask a question. How did you feel when you were telling that story? And you select from a multiple choice, you select a feeling that you felt. So it's a moment of reflection. Then we ask, how did you feel while you were living that story? So you answer those questions. And then the third question we ask is, what do you think the person listening to the story will feel? And so they answer those questions. And so we have that data in our library. So now, explorer, we call our learners explorers. I hate the word consumer. Explorers come in, and the team members, they watch a story. After they watch the story, we ask them the first question they ask them, which is about self-empathy. How did you feel after watching that story or listening to that story? And to take a moment, they reflect and they answer the question, a multiple choice. Then we ask them, how do you think the storyteller felt when they were telling the story? So in the story that William shared, if I were to answer the question, how do I think William felt telling that story? I would probably think hopeful is one. I don't know if that's true or not, but that would be one of the answer I would put in. And the next question is, how do you think William felt while living that story? And then you answer a question. And when I answer, as the explorer, I get to see what William said. I get to see what the storyteller said. And did I match with that storyteller or not?
Okay.
And based on that, and then we have 3 more questions, which is, would you recommend this story to others? How much did your outlook change on this topic? And then would you like to thank the storyteller for their courage? So not sending hearts, but saying that telling their story is a courageous act. So start conditioning and start showing that telling your story is courageous. And based on this, you get a score. So we've added a little gamification. So you start to see a little bit of growth. So every story you watch, you can start seeing your growth. So it builds empathy, and it starts building the courage to tell your own story.
I love this. I'm thinking, I know William's about to say something, and I've got like a million questions. So I'm going to let you talk, William, and then I'll jump back in. Go ahead.
No, the thing that's come up for me, and I don't know if you've considered this at all, or if there's a place for this, is to have it with families, and within, I can, I have adult children, and there are a lot of conversations that we're having now that, I just had no listening for as, a dad before. Maybe it was because of where I was and my responsibilities and everything that I said. But there is a level of vulnerability that that I see within my children when they say of things that they're dealing with, and how their life was, what it was, and how it is for them, that in some case, I don't want to say that, I should have empathy for my kids, but but learning to have empathy for my kids, learning to have empathy for my family members. I don't know if that is a part of your app or something, or just creating a space just for families.
Love the question. Absolutely, it is in our plans. We wanted to start with companies because the companies have the money that could fund this,
Right.
and consumer
Absolutely.
is harder market to get into. But
Right.
absolutely, in fact, if you want, I can set it up for your family if you want to get it going.
Oh,
The idea is absolutely what
wow.
you said.
Thank you.
Is we've set up an organization type of system. So the way it works is you get access to all the public library stories. So let's say today you share a story, you download the app and you share your story, that goes into the public library. A company gets access to all the stories, and they get into each of the employees' learning journey, but also they get access to storage for their own private company-specific stories. So similarly, what we want to do is for families. So families can have their own unit, and so they get access to public stories. So you learn as a family, you grow, and then you share within the family each other's stories. So it's not just empathy for your children; the children having empathy for the parents, because the parents are. Something I heard recently is parents are what? Kids just having kids, right? It's like, and so having empathy for each other, and then you can share your own story. So absolutely, we
Right.
want to do that.
Wow. No, thanks.
I have so many questions right now. I'm just loving this. And anybody who knows me knows I'm super curious. So I'm just going to kind of tack on to his question, and or just say, as both as a home educator in the past and as someone who speaks to groups of teenagers frequently, I feel like if this could somehow be endorsed by school systems, I think that especially the less homogenous school systems, I think that there would be a lot more team building or core building, even if it just started initially. Hopefully, the teachers are also not homogenous in how they're showing up. But I'm thinking that schools and school districts, private schools, could be sectors that would be private schools have a tendency to be more homogenous generally, but they have the money to start this, and I think that that's maybe a sector you've probably already thought about. But I have a question. You said they get uploaded to a database. Is it indexed according to topic? Or if I want to access it, how do I why would I choose William's story over Kevin's story? Or what, is it by picture, or what do I do?
You don't get to choose. The way it works is when you join the app, you create your intersectional profile. This is one of the things that people have not even thought about. We ask the profile questions are age, gender identity, sexual orientation, race, disability, and then it grows over time. We're going to add more. And one of the great things about that is a lot of people don't think about that intersectionality. We all are at intersection of various identities. And so first you learn about your own intersectionality. And then we use that intersectionality information to create a unique learning journey for each person. So the way it works is we first start sharing stories that you're more likely to be familiar with, more likely to be comfortable with. And then slowly over time, we start bringing in new ideas. So it's you have to watch the story we ask you to watch, and then you watch the next one. So it's not based on like a YouTube or a TikTok where you watch whatever you want to watch. It's uniquely curated based on a journey that fits that unique person as well.
Wow.
So smart. So, William, if you don't have another question, I have another one that's just like
Go ahead. Go for it.
in the beginning, as you were telling the story following George Floyd, and how your unique tools and capabilities, you felt like they were falling on the wrong side of history. And I definitely know that there's a lot of people that was a pivotal moment, that where they stood, they no longer wanted to be associated with anything that they considered to be the wrong side of history. And Yet I can imagine that there's another feeling that came up that was kind of almost like a betrayal of what your intention was in the creation. And I know that life has a tendency to give us the same lessons again and again. Is there any worry within you that this tool would be used in a way that might, I don't know, be used against you is the wrong term, but that might be misused? Is there any fear of that?
Absolutely. One of the things we did is every aspect of what we built, we did it with intention and peer-reviewed research and science backing it. We definitely we like even thinking about things like hidden trigger warnings, being able to skip a story if it's too triggering, as well as some not showing names. So one of the things is not a social media platform. So you don't get to see it's William. You just get to see a video. They might be their face. Some people have not shared their face. Some people are just sharing a story by pointing the camera to a toy, for example. And so we are working on creating that safe space where you can't message each other, you can't comment, you can't do anything. It's just truly about your learning journey. And every story that gets uploaded gets manually reviewed. And so we are working very hard to make sure that the impact matches the intent. That is one thing that you brought up is very important. I posted recently on LinkedIn, which was most companies talk about assume positive intent or positive intent. But what that's become is it's become a tool to almost become toxic. And because what happens is when we say assume positive intent and someone brings up a concern, it's like, wait, assume positive intent, that they're trying to be positive. But the fact remains the impact was harmful. So the way we want to evolve that to say is this, assume positive intent, but own the impact. And so we want to own the impact in this. So we are measuring things. We are for the trials, we offer a independent survey to measure the impact as well. So we're working very hard to make sure that the intent matches the impact as well.
So when somebody sends a comment at the end, is it a comment that they can type out, thank you for your courage, or they just get that specific message to disable people trolling other people or things of that nature? That would, the positive intent that you would assume is that they're going to thank them for their courage, and the occasional person who has nothing better to do listens to a story and trolls someone. Does that disable that from happening?
So no one can put in comments. The question is, do you want to thank them for the courage? Yes or no? And then you just say yes or no. And then on the other side, the storyteller just gets a count of how many people have thanked them for their courage. They don't even get to see the name. So we've removed that part of it because I intentionally did not want to build a social media platform where people could send again, matching that intent and working through what are the different, like one of the lens we put on is how can this be harmful to someone? And then we go through all those tests, and that's how we came up with the trigger warning. That's how we came up with skipping stories or skipping a user or skipping a storyteller, for example.
No, I am like I said when we first spoke, I knew that we would have a lot more conversations, Kevin, and so I am just it's like I think I go back to I get it, vulnerability and story, and I think there's something that came up before about story, and my, I don't say my reservation about story is because as a child, story was like lying. If you're telling a story, you're lying, right? And it was something to the point that I didn't want to tell my story, because I didn't want to leave anything out and then be accused of lying or not telling the whole truth and all that. So it's like, you know what? You don't know anything. So how can we really embrace our story instead of what I have seen in my life is stories that I tell myself to keep me from showing up, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That absolutely makes sense. And part of this is there's no way for us to verify if it's a real story or not. These are our
Right.
stories. And
Right.
so really it's our perspective. And sometimes, and the reality is, I probably after 5 years, if I tell a story that's 5 years old, even a week old, I'm going to
Right.
miss some details. That's the reality. Our brain works that way. So
Right.
this isn't about, are you telling the full truth and 100% of the truth? This is about, and are you keeping all the details in play? This is about
Right.
telling your story that is the impact on you. This is your
Right.
perspective, understanding your perspective. So, for example, you mentioned school earlier. I absolutely would love to bring this to schools. In fact, I'll, if it, want to make it available to free for schools if possible. Um, if this was available in schools and we were using it, I remember when I was in school, um, one person took my initials of my name, my middle name and my last name and my first name, and KAS, and turned it into, in Hindi it means crow, and everyone started calling me crow. The entire school, teachers started calling me crow, and I hated it.
Mm.
I just hated it, and it went on for years. And I'm thinking back, like if I had like, there's parts of it that I still don't remember, but what I remember is my perspective, is what is the
Mm.
healing part that needs to be done. Is
Right.
me telling my story. Like right now, I'm like, I would go and I would tell my mom, I would cry to my mom. Then my mom would even go to teachers and complain and say, hey, stop doing this. And they didn't stop. They would
Mm.
still joke, and they would still, because they didn't think it was harmful, but I was getting, and it was on for years and years and years. Even to this day, if I go and see some of my high school friends, they'll make a joke about curl till this day.
Mm. Mm.
And if I had if I had some app like this where I would be able to just share my feelings, you're like,
Right.
hey, this happened. It wasn't my identity I chose. You all gave this to me. And now my perspective is that everyone is calling me crow, and I just feel terrible. I just feel horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared that story. I may have missed out the details. I may have said everyone instead. Maybe there was one or two people who didn't, right? There's some parts of
Right.
it that might not be completely true.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the impact is what matters on me. And
Got it.
that's by just telling my story now, even. And when I spoke up, I don't share the story often, to be honest, but I tell it to my friends, or I tell it to my husband, and it makes me feel better because I can see, even telling y'all, I saw your reactions, I saw the love y'all brought for me,
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
and
Mm.
that was healing.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. I'm enjoying this so much. And, I'm realizing that kids in high school could upload and it could go to different other high schools or other middle schools. And it's no longer the kid in your class that you choose to do things outside of the class that are not nice. Um, I keep going back to this idea that memories are changing. Every time that we remember something, we remember it
Yeah.
how we told it the last time. And
Mm.
what William was saying of like, if we left out details, and I just had a little kind of millisecond of an understanding that the way we're telling the story, even when it changes, is where we need the healing. The trigger is
Mm-hmm.
still in
Mm.
that story.
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to
Wow.
be updated. So it almost doesn't matter if it remains the same. I have a different and separate question following that observation, but there's a lot of code words that are thrown around in society that, even to say trigger warning is something that's, I don't know, probably the past 3 to 5 years. I never heard that before when people would tell stories, or they wouldn't tell stories. So we
Right.
have these code words. And one of those code words that we use right now, or that has been popularized oftentimes to exaggerated levels, is the word narcissist. And the idea of narcissism and narcissists not being able to hold empathy, or even to question whether they are narcissists within themselves.
Right.
I think that there are a lot of people who wind up, they're a narcissist in all socioeconomic levels. I don't want to make a jaded perspective, but I definitely have seen a lot of narcissist people step into leadership positions because they have the charisma to pull following. and then to abuse following. So I'm wondering where narcissists show up. Should this be intersectional with a narcissist? How does it, they say you can't teach empathy to a narcissist. Do they just start to become labeled in the company? That, I mean, they probably wouldn't be looking for your product if they were the
Right.
CEO. But let's say you have a narcissist on your team and they do these empathy exercises and they're consistently, they do it because they have to, or they want to get their bonus or whatever the incentive is, and they're constantly failing. Do they get marked as someone who's without empathy, who becomes kind of like a bad seed on the team, or how does that work for them?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things we're saying is don't make this mandatory. We want to invite someone in. So that's one thing. So the way we do that is by sharing those powerful stories, like having a leader or an employee within the company. Anyone, like if I say, oh, check out this app, William's got a story in there, and Sarah, William, you like, okay, let me go listen to the story. So that having that connection brings people in, and we want to then get them hooked by those amazing stories that are in there and these powerful stories that they see. But I first disagree that I think empathy can be learned by anyone. And for someone who does seem like a narcissist, let us have empathy towards them. Why are they narcissists? Narcissism is really just a form of defense mechanism. If we think about it, if it's someone putting up like, oh, I am really great because maybe there's some trauma in their past, or
sure.
maybe
Yeah.
some of those things. So in one of the biggest ways to get past that is vulnerability. If a narcissistic person just shares their story, they can to themselves. They don't even have to say it out to the world. If they just stand in front of the mirror and just tell themselves the story of their trauma, or tell someone they love the story of whatever that led to wherever they are now, that can start breaking through some of this. So the way I would probably put in is, in this app, because the way our learning journey is based on the intersectional profile, it's likely that the story that you're going to in the first 5-6 stories you're going to watch, it's going to be something you're very relatable to, something you're more likely to reflect back on and think about, oh, that's like me, or that's my story, or that's similar to my story. And that's what triggers like, oh, wow, someone else went through that and they're sharing it. And that starts sort of chipping away at some of that defense and the guards that people have up.
Beautiful. Thank you for taking time to dig into that. I know there are so many people who are mislabeled as narcissists. It's just like one of those code words that gets thrown out. But that was curious to me. Thank you.
I think the conversation, I've been saying this for a couple months and I'm still trying to getting some understanding on it, is that, I'm whole and complete. And at the same time, I'm not aware of my completeness. Right. And so the more that I appreciate and become aware that I do have narcissist tendencies and I could show up that way because it's a part of, it could easily be a defense mechanism and kind of to show up, then I can be aware that I can be something else. And I think that's the one thing that I appreciate about your stories and the app is that it gives us opportunity. It's not even redemption. It's just an understanding of ourselves. The more that we understand ourselves, the more that we can understand other people. And for me, just like every time I pull my, you are kind, card and my you cards, the first thing that I feel that am I being kind to myself? Before I'm kind to anybody else, can I be kind to myself? And I think the level of empathy that I seek, it, first starts with myself. And I love how there's this individual journey that, there's it's not right and wrong. You don't start off, it's like, hey, I'm a, empathy, champion or something. I don't know what the game at the end of it, but to really embrace the fact that, yes, I'm getting points. Yes, there's this understanding, but beyond the points in the game, of it all, I'm a better person. I'm showing up, for humanity. That's the game. And so I don't know. I just wanted to thank you for that. That was just coming up for me, that it's like I mislabel myself, because there are some labels that it's like, okay, I've seen it more than once, so I guess that's me. No, you just need to give another opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. And something that is sort of stuck in my head, and I wanted to go back to Sarah, if when I originally shared, and William so bravely and courageously shared his story, you said you flipped it and asked yourself, when did I first realize I was white? I was curious, what came into your mind then?
Thank you for digging into my being curious about me. I went back to being 4 years old, living in Mesa, Arizona, having a neighborhood where it was primarily white, but I do remember black families, and I also remember Hispanic families in the neighborhood. And I think there was a family from Laos as well. And somehow all of the kids were at the bus stop, 4 years old. Yeah, I think bus stop or something around that. And then we would come home and hey, let's hang out and play kind of thing. And for me, it was, so every family was cooking differently. And I remember the smells of each of the houses. And I had to preface it with the cooking, because the odor was not negative. It was just a very specific, these are every family has its scent that is consistent, that shows up. And I can remember, this doesn't smell like our house. And that was a moment where it was like, what are they eating? And I mean, I'm such a foodie now, and we eat so much international food, and definitely our house probably smells nothing like our neighbor's house either, because of the huge mixture of spices that we're constantly using. But I think spices were actually one of the scent of spices in cooking were one of the first points where I realized this isn't like me. I don't know if I was like, their skin is different, but it was like their house smells different than what home smells like to me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate you
Thanks.
sharing that story.
I don't know that it was especially brave or anything, but it was definitely a moment that of just sensing a difference.
Wow. And now when you reflect back on it, how do you feel about that?
Oh, I'm so glad that I've embraced all of those scents and all of those cultures as home for me. I feel really wonderful that I can not be limited to one thing and making that one thing right as home, and that all of those things can be home for me now.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome.
Oh, wow. I'm just like these stories that you all both shared and this moment, and I now have a new perspective. I didn't know this. This is something, to be honest, I have yet to watch a story where someone have answered that question. When is the first time I realized I was white? I've watched 600 stories in the library right now, and I have not heard one like that. And it really gives me a new perspective, and how a simple thing as cooking your food from your culture can be that way to show people that that there is that strength and diversity, and your life is now enhanced because you've embraced those spices and you've brought in those into your world. And
Yeah.
could not be a better symbology of what we're trying to talk about when we talk about vulnerability and stories and diversity and inclusion. The power of that your the part that this is that we talk about is, it's not just about making my life or William's life or Sarah's life better. It's really about making all of our lives better together. If you raise the lowest marginalized people, you raise yourself as well.
Yeah. I feel very fortunate that my realization of being white was not a traumatic realization. It was the ability to include it by learning it later. And I do realize the white privilege in that. But I'm very thankful for those memories, and thankful also to be able to hear William's story, because after all these years, I know that still that is a trigger for him, being misunderstood. And, now wondering if there is some sort of kind of like role playing that goes back to that time that's worth doing to dive into that. What did Black people sound like?
Right.
What do you think she thought you sounded like? Kind of using these reflection questions that Kevin is bringing up. What do you think
Right.
she thought she heard? What did that symbolize? Who taught her that symbolized what it did as a child? And all these things that are coming up for me as I listen to this. I really, really love this development, and my brain is always working a million miles a minute to just think about how can I share awesome stuff with awesome people. And I think there are a ton of people who would benefit from this. It's just such first of all, it's a brilliant tool. And when William told me about, this guy, before I watched it, he was like, it's something about a platform for, just read the description on like our calendar. And he was like, this guy has something about telling stories. He could have told me more, and I just, it was just like a second, and that's not blameful. We just had a second. I was like, what is this about? And now after hearing this, I'm like, oh, hell yeah. What do we need to do to get this everywhere? As opposed to just another place to YouTube your story with trigger warnings or something like that. This feels like it's community building, and I really, really love it.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that and recognizing that. And William has just been this amazing supporter since our first conversation. We've had many. I am truly a fan of William, and it's just incredible work that William does, and all the conversations he's having. It's just not only to understand, and I told him in our conversations, like, just these conversations is a way for him to understand himself as well as understand other people, and just what a brave way to do it. One story I wanted to share is, I grew up in essentially homogenous. I grew up in India, so most of the people were brown. I didn't see Black people at all, other than TV and movies, because I consumed a lot of Hollywood content and English content. But when I moved to United States, I constantly was reminded that I was brown. Was constantly reminded, and I didn't realize that, because in a way I grew up as the white privilege of India, because everyone is the same. So when you're in there, that's how it felt. Coming here, one of the first experiences I remember was in the college. I was in my bachelor's degree right outside my university dorm building, and it's in the evening, and all the students are out, and they're in the quad and just hanging out and doing things. And this one guy comes over and just yells and calls me a terrorist. And this is post 9/11 time, 2005. And even going through TSA, I can see the difference in behavior when it was coming through between me, and because I'm married to a white man, I can see the difference in behavior even today between those pieces. And so for me, it's definitely these sharing the story, and then when people hear that aspect, they change their behavior, and it's healing for me, because I know now I've made an impact to someone else.
I love it. It's so meaningful to me. I lived in Israel for many years, and I know how I was prototyped going into Israel by security as like, what are you doing here as a single white woman? I mean, I was really taken by security many, many times. What are you doing here as a single white woman living here this long? It probably didn't help that in the beginning I was studying international terrorism to better understand it at the University of Tel Aviv, and that somehow that was linked. But I know that I had significantly better treatment in what was then, it wasn't TSA the way it is now, than you went through. And it's so hard for me, this racial profiling, and something that I've noticed recently since everything that's happened with George Floyd, that has been and I don't want to use the wrong verbiage here, so forgive me and correct me if I say things incorrectly. But I live in Atlanta, and it's, a very, very rich in African American people here, and the majority of my friends are multicultural. And I have noticed there has been just this general anger that has shown up from Black people towards white people in general. Like whether I want to say all the time, I'm on your team. Like, what can I do to support you? But just by being white, I'm seen as not on their team. And being able to experience that reverse reaction and anger of like, we've been holding this for so long. Now we're going to show our anger, and you are part of the inclusive unit that gets to feel being racially targeted in some way as being the bad people that are treating the Black people wrong. And that has been really hard for me, that I show up with kindness and that people are just disgruntled with me because I'm white. And I know that that's a reality that a lot of people of color have dealt with since day one. And I haven't known how to soften that, or if there was even if there was a reason why I needed to soften it for myself, or if I needed to absorb that to fully empathize with what people of color go through on the regular. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I before Kevin, before you say anything, I want to speak to this. I think that's why, for me, Kevin, your tool is so important. Is because I get that. I'll say it this way. I saw the miniseries Roots when I was, in elementary school, back in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, around that time. I was probably 100 pounds, soaking wet, little scrawny little person. And after watching the miniseries Roots and just, one family story about, slavery in America, there was this rage that I didn't know what to do with, didn't know, I didn't want to fight with anyone or but all of a sudden I was like heightened. I wasn't at the time watching the news. I don't know what was going on in the news. I'm sure there was something, happening. But for me, I felt that now that I was aware of not the slavery in a book, but seeing it on TV, seeing it in a story form, and then seeing people around me that kind of looked like that and sometimes sounded like those, there was this anger. And I really got with myself. And I think that's where the, living beyond our labels kind of started to show up, because there was this, I wasn't Black enough, and I wasn't, and I wasn't white, type of thing. Who are you? Type of thing. And so I think I said all that to say this. We have entered a place of everyone's a suspect. And it's like the labels are, want to, I don't want to say mix, but want to pick sides so then that we can kind of recalibrate. And so as these kind of recalibration is happening, these are my words, these are my thoughts. Everyone's a suspect. So I can't trust that, you can say that you're an ally, but I don't know if you're an ally. And it's going to take me hearing stories, and it's going to take me not just seeing you out with me, because in some cases there's like, okay, they could be spying, right? Or something. I mean, just crazy things that go through. I mean, I've had people tell tell me that I'm there in support. And it's like, what are you up to? It's like, whoa, I thought we're on the same side here. And it's like, no, it's not. I haven't seen you here before. So what I am saying, and I hopefully you'll be able to feel this, Sarah, is that tools and opportunities for people to not see everyone as a suspect, as a potential enemy, as someone that will do each other harm. But the more that we're able to really speak and tell our stories at the level of pain that we haven't said before. I mean, there's I can tell you there's a level of pain that I have within me that I haven't articulated because I don't have language for. But in order for me to really find healing in it, I know that I can talk to you. I can talk to Sarah. I can talk to Kevin. I can share these stories once I get the language. And I think tools like this is giving us the language to get beyond how we feel and how we're not showing up for each other right now. So I don't know. I just wanted to say that because I know what team that you're on, right?
Yeah,
You're
right.
on humanity's team, right?
Right, for sure,
And
sure.
how we figure that out
Mm-hmm.
is tools like Kevin has. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. William, thank you for saying that and sharing that perspective. And Sarah, I totally understand that feeling you're having. You're like, I'm an ally, but why am I not trust? But this is where, again, practicing empathy from generations and generations of
For
people
sure.
trusting and breaking that trust. When we have TV presenters like Sean Hannity, who says, "Oh, I like black people. I'm colorblind," and they use language like that. And then they have the highest viewership on cable, right?
Right.
The numbers, the data is something that is hard to argue against. And continuously, like William said, that people will come up as allies and then break the trust. And so the way I love how William you put it is share your stories so we know who you are. By
Mm-hmm.
just saying you're an ally, that's not enough. But if you tell me
For
who
sure.
you are, tell me your
Mm-hmm.
story, tell me your struggles, tell me that you and I are similar because of your
Mm-hmm.
struggles and your story, then that starts building the trust. And that comes back to the whole leadership question as well. So why a leader would also listen is a leader always worries about, can I trust my team members? Can the team members trust me? And if we share each other's stories and bring that vulnerability builds trust. That's the
Mm-hmm.
best part about it. Because when I'm vulnerable to my friends are vulnerable to me, or the people, my colleagues are vulnerable to me. And then they're like, I'm going to trust this person because they were vulnerable with me.
Sure. Yeah. I think that we learn that as coaches also, that trust, building that trust through storytelling and in creating a safe space. We often at the end of shows like to kind of like talk about our own takeaways from the conversation. So do you want to start, William, or should I?
You can start. Thanks.
Cool. I think one of the strongest takeaways, as you know, I'm always thinking about memories changing. The fact that the part that needs the healing will always come up no matter how much the memory changes, that the trigger is
Right.
always going to remain there until it's healed, was really important for me to remember. That even if there's a part of me like that's questioning, is this what happened? It almost doesn't matter if this is
Right.
exactly what happened. Whatever I remember from someone else's story, even if it doesn't align with how I heard it before, is where the healing needs to occur.
Right.
And I just feel, I think that a lot of times throughout this year, I've experienced both. I don't know if personally, but definitely collectively, as I talk with people, this kind of like hopelessness of
Got
just,
it.
okay, the Black Lives Matter, stop Asian hate, just like this constant, like each team, as it is represented as teams, unfortunately, is going to have something that's going to break apart what's going on. But ultimately, it's a breaking apart to come together differently. And in as much as I hear people, say 2020 was just such a shitty year, it was awful, it was the worst year of my life, business or whatever, there is a part of me that feels like, Kevin, what you've created from this place is the hope for humanity that I speak about when I say there are brilliant people who are going to come up with tools to help us heal. I think that you, not only personally, but the tool you've created is the living momentum of change that can happen, of innovation that can happen in the moment of crisis, someone stepping up to the plate in the moment of crisis, creating something that is so beautiful and opening for a community. I really want to bless you for being able to pivot, because there was a huge financial loss for you. I mean, there's a lot of people who would say, well, I'm just going to ride this wave out. But having that personal commitment from the moment you saw something that you had created no longer being in alignment with your ethos is a lesson that I wish so many other leaders and people who were sitting on that kind of money would say the same thing, and had the internal ethos to say, yo, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. That to me shows a level of integrity that is the future of what I want to be a part of. And I just salute you in such a huge way for that. Thank you.
I'm honored. Thank you so much. It is not just me. There's a team of folks that joined the mission to do this, and thank you for recognizing it and giving me an opportunity to share some of that in my stories as well. My takeaway was this: we need to have more conversations as people with ourselves, with others, and really start telling our stories. Because when reality, what I come down to is when we share our stories, we realize that there's so much in common with us. We're all just looking for happiness and fulfillment, and our stories demonstrate that.
So the reason why I wanted to, I don't want to say go last in this, is because I was trying to, I guess, get up the courage to say what I was feeling, and that when I first met you, Kevin, I mean, it hit my heart, right? So this conversation that we're having tonight is a continuation from our first conversation, for me. And even though I said yes to, really going to the empathy gym and just understanding the importance of it, I still haven't walked into the gym. I still haven't recorded my video. And I realized tonight, my biggest takeaway was there was a level of vulnerability that I still wasn't able to step into. There was a level of really not really trusting that on the other side of my pain and my disappointment and my fear was healing. And so, thank you. Because now I know in like 3 minutes or less, right? Right? The journey can begin. And so, yeah, I can see the world full of people recognizing that the difficulty of making a video will become easier, then it'll become easier to have a conversation with people right in front of them.
Wow.
And
Thank you.
and so that's what I got. Blessings, my friend.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take a moment and thank our listeners for joining us. This has been a really meaningful conversation for me personally. I think all of the healing conversations are important, but my own thoughts of how I take this and take it further into the world, what I can do to perpetuate the momentum that has been opened up here is really sitting with me, and definitely wanting to connect with you further about how we can share this in schools. I know that that's not the initial moneymaker, but I do feel that there is a momentum here for schools and for growth. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to share this, and let you know that it touched me very personally, this conversation. And I'm excited about what you've created here. I think that it's really worthy of a lot of attention. And I'm praying and will actively do what I can to make sure that I do my part to bring some attention to this as well, other than this platform that we've created. So thank you to all of our listeners who've joined. And if you're interested in hearing more about Jago and how you can wake up your own healing, I would like for you to please reach out to Kevin. And he's offering this beautiful gift of a couple months for your company. What do you have to lose? Oh my goodness. So please dive in on this. We'll have the details for you in the show notes. So thank you for taking time to be with us, and we wish you all many blessings. Thank you.
Blessings.
Thank you.